Welcome, dear learners. This lecture on oral tradition has been developed based on the references available, as oral tradition is the concept and the methodology to analyze the culture with deeper understanding. It tries to look religion and culture with the help of oral tradition from various views expressed by scholars. It is also an important point to emphasize that to understand the nexus between religion and culture, we must know what constitutes religion as well as culture stronger in a society, because the lifestyles of a community may be understood by receiving the resources of oral traditions, which constitute the whole knowledge system of a community. Further, it reveals all its life cycles of the community through its ethnic journeys. At this context, the whole lesson matter has been made based on socio as well as the anthropological aspects of tradition and oral tradition with some examples. Shall we now go to the topic? Dear learners, as objectives of this lecture, learners will enable to understand the relation of tradition with the relation to religion and culture in everyday life, to introduce the concept of oral tradition as method to understand religion and culture, to evaluate the different views proposed by various school of thoughts. Tradition, generally defined as the handing down of customs or beliefs from one generation to the next, is well established concept in society and one that is often explored in communications and cultural studies. Tradition provides the basis on which we understand our socio-cultural environment, be it our society, our community, or our families. Since our early years as humans began, tradition has been the foundation that gives meaning and purpose to our social lives and serves as a guide to our beliefs, values, and behaviors. Tradition emerges as a rather dynamic metastructure into which one is born, within which and through which one acquires the sense of the world and develops the sense of agency, subjectivity, or selfhood, in short, the individuality. The concept is a fundamental concern in many other disciplines, including philosophy, history, religion, art, literature, and law. Scholars in these fields confront highly self-conscious bodies of ideas as they are transmitted over time. A community's cultural and historical traditions are passed down by word of mouth or example from one generation to another without written instruction. According to UNESCO, the oral traditions and expressions domain encompasses an enormous variety of spoken forms, including proverbs, riddles, tales, nursery rhymes, legends, myths, epic song and poems, charms, prayers, chants, songs, dramatic performance, and more. Oral traditions and expressions are used to pass on knowledge, cultural and social values, and collective memory. They play a crucial part in keeping cultures alive. Oral traditions can be categorized into different types, including legends, myths, folk tales, and memories. A memory is an account of personal experience or encounter with the supernatural, such as a ghost story or other expression of the spirit to a human being. Oral traditions are historical sources of a special nature. Their special nature derives from the fact that they are unwritten sources couched in a form suitable for oral transmission, and that their preservation depends on the powers of memory of successive generations of human beings. The transmission of knowledge, skill, and attitude is taken into consideration in oral and written communication as the basis of human action processed by thought, imagination, and experiences in the exposure of human beings. It will lead to behavioral adaptation in conformance with rules, rituals, customs, values, mores, some like folkways, and other relevant prescriptions of a culture. The use of distinct language to communicate with a social group as developed by oral and written forms is a traditional communicative process in order to deliver a specific message on human action grounded in culture. The personal information received in the group interaction defines the language, dialect, and means of communication. It is the language exposure that gives the individual a particular dialect, not birth or race. It has something to do with the communicative culture that responds to a particular tradition. How the oral traditions viewed from various school of thought. Let us look into the folkloric view of oral tradition. There are a number of basic concepts generally underlying the study of folklore. For the sake of better understanding, those concepts may be classified into various groups: popular antiquities, popular literature, oral tradition, oral literature, folklore, and folk literature, which were coined the earlier, will fall under one group. Folklore is to be understood as oral tradition and belief handed down from generation to generation without use of writing. From the beginning of folkloristics, as the outline is unusually drawn, folklorists were marked by either a preoccupation with aesthetic textual characteristics of folklore as a literary product or a stress on the functional aspects of oral tradition as a cultural product. The interest that many showed in defining folklore as oral tradition is a clue to the fact that there were attempts to keep folklore apart without allowing it to enter the realm of cultural anthropology. A large majority of the definitions given to folklore definition can be availed from the Maria Leach work, stress oral tradition and heritage. When W.J. Thoms coined the word folklore, he did not intend oral tradition. Folklore was a term that included the study of facts as part of heritage. The answer to the question as to how its extensiveness was narrowed to connote only oral tradition is quite interesting. The answer to the question as to how is extensive was narrowed, the same I repeat again, the connote only oral tradition is quite interesting. In Indian oral tradition, there are likewise only a few tales that approximately correspond to and may be identified with European tale types. As far as oral tradition is concerned, its texture constitutes the phonemes, the arrangement, morphemes, their arrangement, and suprasegmentally elements like concept proposed by American cultural anthropologist Alan Dennis, with regard to proverbs, their intonation and rhythm are part of their texture. Oral literature did not need writing to become literature, and it continued long after writing was invented. Walter J. Ong has given a useful term, oral residue, referring to the characteristics of orality that remain in the world of literacy after the introduction of writing. The term applies very well to literature. The characteristics of orality are applicable more widely than words heard and words seen to encompass a psychology of the oral mind of and many facets of the world, like of folk group, including literature and its interaction with the written word. Dear learners, the next important point, the anthropological view of oral tradition. Oral tradition, also called orality as earlier cited, was the first and still most widespread mode of human communication. For more than just talking, oral tradition refers to a dynamic and highly diverse oral medium for evolving, storing, and transmitting knowledge, art, and ideas. It is typically contrasted with literacy, with it which it can and does interact in myriad ways, and also with literature, which it dwarfs in size, diversity, and social function. Oral literature is used by anthropologists and others to refer unwritten forms that can be regarded as in some way possessing literary qualities. It thus broadly covers such oral forms as myths, narratives, epics, lyrics, prose, poetry, laments, and the verbal text of songs, sometimes riddles, proverbs, and perhaps oratory and drama. The study of such forms is an area in which both literary and linguistic scholar and folklorists have long interacted with anthropologists. The concept of oral literature, already found among some 19th century collectors, even 20th century, was brought into wider currency by H.M. and N.K. Shortwick's comparative work on the growth of literature, and later by Albert Bates Lord's influential. The Singer of Tales in 1960, which treated the fluidity of text and oral formulaic principles of composition in performance. Since then, the term has been extensively used both by literary scholars and by anthropologists, for example, Ruth Finnegan, 1970, and Parag Garadi in 1982, Richard Bauman, 1986. It is sometimes confined to oral formulaic works composed in performance. Sometimes it is used more widely of journals transmitted, composed, or performed orally in literate as well as non-literate contexts. The term is controversial. However, some literary scholars consider it self-contradictory, means literature from Latin littere could not be unwritten, while others hold that the anthropologist comparative method has always relied on extending terms from their original Western reference and that we regularly use words in senses far from their root etymologies. Some writers regard oral literature as having potentially negative connotations and prefer the more positive neologism orature. Further references and discussion can be found in that Ruth Finnegan and Tonkin in 1992. The next important thing, historical point of view of the oral tradition. Oral tradition is also more constantly subject to outside influences because of its close connection with the current social situation. Each performance is on a specific occasion and each occasion is in turn subject to the whole changing social background. This means that there is constant interpretation and reinterpretation in terms of the current situation. An example taken from Ruth Finnegan will precisely emphasize the significant role of oral tradition. A story of the founding of the King Dome of Goncha in northern Ghana, a period at which Goncha was divided into 7 administrative divisions. The story tells how the state was first founded by a certain Jakpa who came to the area in search of gold, conquered the local inhabitants and became king by right of conquest. His 7 sons and their descendants became the 7 divisional chiefs. The same story was collected after 6 decades. Ruth Finnegan mentions that by that date 2 of the old divisions had disappeared, leaving only 5, and the tale speaks of only 5 sons, with no mention at all of the other 2. A narrative like this is obviously influenced as much by present realities and power relationship as by historical considerations. The idea, therefore, that oral tradition is somehow impervious to all the kinds of influences of which historians must take cognizance in other sources is far from the truth. Oral tradition, being inherently variable and unfixed, is in certain ways peculiarly susceptible to which this is something of which an historian using these sources must take special account. Another study done from South India also emphasizes the role of oral tradition is inevitable to historical evidence. This research on oral tradition tries to view from the migration point. As migration is a common phenomenon that can be found in all societies, depending upon the various factors, it is identified with various names. Migration has played a decisive role in changing the social structures of Theri land in the southern Tamil Nadu. It can be observed by analyzing their migration with the historical approach, which means the oral tradition approach. By analyzing their migration, one can classify that into the 3 stages. First one is migration in oral narratives such as myth, legends, and also in ballads. Second one is during missionaries and British rule in India. It can also be noted as Christianity and Sanskritization among the particular land. Third one is the impacts of education, trading and migration. Based on the mentioned 3 stages of classifications on migration among the particular land from the South Tamil Nadu, there is a huge chance of reconstructing the history of the land and people. The process also studies the changes. That changes occurred in the socio-economic and religious practices as well. Then it will also elucidate how it brings changes within the social structures and how it is made visible in the marriage alliances between the social organization of subgroups of every community. In other words, how migration made changes in the social structure and how it was and is considered in terms of exogamous and endogamous practices in terms of their social institution. Oral tradition, sociological point of view. During and before the 70s, means 1970s, tradition in India was largely defined with reference to structural functional analysis. It stressed the strengthening part of tradition, which the publication of Louis Dumont, like Homo hierarchicus in 1970, there appeared a structuralist approach to the study of traditions. The pivotal notions of structuralism, such as ideology, dialectics, transformational relationships, and comparison, through which a unity of principles among a variety of societal or civilizational forms is established, have been brought to bear upon the analysis of caste stratification in India. In his study of caste stratification in Homo hierarchicus, Dumont has established that India is a religious society and the concept of pure and impure is solely guided by traditions. In fact, hierarchical caste stratification is a tradition-bound social order. It is based on the principle of inequality. Emrc, in one of his studies published in Contribution to Indian Sociology, applies ethno-methodology to understand Indian society. Whatever meaning we might give to ethno-methodology, it means the role of traditions in the life world of an individual. Another scholar, Milton Singer, brought out his study, A Great Tradition Modernizes an Anthropological Approach to Indian Civilization in 1972. It was a study of the Indian joint family in modern industry with reference to early Madrasity. Singer has rejected many of the earlier findings of sociology. He suspects that the joint family has been changing. He argues that Indian industrialization has initiated a process of adaptive change. In other words, modernization has not fully rejected family traditions. It has, in fact, obliged the tradition to adapt to adaptive change. Yogendra Singh, another Indian sociologist, calls it modernization of traditions. Singer labels it adaptation of tradition to modernization, but Yogendra Singh identifies a dimensional approach to the study of Indian structure. This approach does not consider tradition as its focus of inquiry. Instead, it applies a multi-dimensional perspective to the understanding of a society. Yogendra Singh in 1996 explains his multi-dimensional approach. Many studies of social structures in India, however, do not consciously use the notion of tradition as a normative framework in their analysis. Instead, social structure is defined from a multidimensional perspective using sets of social variables or categories. The approach sometimes approximates the Weberian typological formulation and dimensions of social structure such as status, wealth, and power. The social phenomena of the folk ways are generally presented by psychological and cultural views as standard human actions of a distinct ethnic group. Generally, it is the unique, distinct, and isolated tradition and culture developed by the ancestors that have been passed from one generation to the next. The social development process of folk ways is the way a social group thinks, acts, and lives based on the observation and conviction of certain social facts. In the folk ways, the group process operates through the intermediary of societal forces to define the distinct social life that is later carried on by the group members through learned behavior and repetitive observation of customs and habits in the community. The term folkways was coined by William Graham Sommer in his work A Study of the Sociological Importance of Usages, Manners, Customs and Mores and Morals in 1906. The origin of folkways represents the physiological needs of the individuals to conform to the traditional practices confronted by the habitual prescription of social activities in the ethnic group. Therefore, the origin of this concept refers to the imperative human actions that derive from imitating the tradition and culture of a given society. Religious belief represents the another concept within that sociological view. Religious belief represents the shared ideas and knowledge about the existence of supernatural orders or divinities in ancient times. It is a group perception being passed from one generation to the next through storytelling, folk tales, and myths about the experience of the past and the existence of mystic beliefs. The existence of such things is usually respected by doing worship to the divinity and deity through rituals, sacrifices, and festivities. The term belief is socially acceptable and means to deliver the tradition and culture of certain groups as directed by the knowledge and ideas in their evolving understand and exposure in the family, clan, friends, and other members of the society. This is further transformed into a holistic societal belief through the study of institutional dimensions in politics, education, philosophy, organizations, and even business and industry. Oral tradition is viewed as a significant role in a society. Oral tradition plays a key role in all societies, despite the reliance of some cultures on written records and accounts. These traditions account for the way things are and often the way they should be, and assist people in educating the young and teaching important lessons about the past and about life. Because many oral traditions are highly structured, are told faithfully without alteration, they can be as reliable as other non-oral ways of recording and passing on experiences. While oral traditions can vary from teller to teller, variations are also open to contradiction in the same way that written accounts are. In this way, the force of oral tradition can continue through generations, although small details in the telling may change. Because of this, oral traditions that relate past events and have been passed down through time cannot be dismissed simply as myth, in the sense that Western society polarizes the differences between myth and science or fact. Ideas about truth, rationality, logic, causality, and ways of knowing the world contextualized within or all society. They are entirely valid within their cultural context and should be respected as such. Stories told in a social situation were narrated during special occasions, and these types of oral traditions served as entertainment for children and adults. At the same time, it is the charter for society too. Let us have a brief look at an Indian example of this oral tradition. The Siri Santi, also known as the Siri Bhaddana, the Epic of Siri, is an epic poem in the Tulu language consisting of 15,683 lines of the poetry. It is the longest poem in Tulu. The epic is essentially a biography of legendary Bund princess Siri Alvedi and expands to describe the fate of her progeny, son Kumara, daughter Swani, and granddaughters Abegi and Dorage. The epic declares Siri's divinity and also that of her progeny, and she is worshipped as a deva across the Tulu region of southwest India in temples known as Adi Alade. Siri is the patron deity of the Tulu people. Her worship and mass possession cult surrounding her transgress caste and ethnic lines. The Epic of Siri, though in Tulu, is well known among Kannada speaking populations in and around Tulu region. It is recited in parts in a highly ritual style during the annual festival of Siri Jatre and the mass procession festival called Dayal. The complete recitation of the epic takes close to 25 hours roughly. The Epic of Siri has been translated into English by Laurie Hongo a Finnish linguist and folklorist. Dear learners, the term oral tradition has been used without further definition, as though the meaning of the term were a simple and straightforward matter, yet at the same time distinctions and differences have been suggested and implied time and again in writings on the subject. No one has attempted to draw all these distinctions together in order to show what a complex process oral tradition really is and to present an unified picture of this complexity. Oral tradition represents a vital and multifunctional means of verbal communication that supports diverse activities in diverse cultures. As humankind's first and still most ubiquitous mode of communication, it bears a striking resemblance to one of the newest communication technologies, the internet. Like oral tradition, the internet works by varying within limits, as when software architects use specialized language to craft websites, or when a user clicking on a link opens up multiple but not an infinite group of connections. Both the internet and oral tradition operate via navigation through webs of options. Both depend upon multiple distributed authorship. Both work through rule-governed processes rather than fossilized texts. And both ultimately derive their strength from their ability to change and adapt. This lecture on oral tradition would have been a useful session to analyze the culture with a deeper understanding. I am sure that it might have given insight to into religion and culture with the help of oral tradition and various views expressed by the scholars. As pointed out earlier, the lifestyles of a community may be understood by receiving the resources of oral traditions which constitute the whole community. Further, it reveals all its lifestyles through its ethnic journeys. I hope you all enjoyed the session, which may have enriched your knowledge of oral tradition. Dear learners, we will meet on another schedule. Thank you and all the best.